Like, you need the famous professor or the driven professor to get started. But the graduates and students and postdocs are literally working 24/7 in the lab to come up with the findings and do the experiments. And so I would always look at the climate. Now, this is some flexibility that I had at the Sloan Foundation. The Sloan Foundation has always had a commitment to diversity in STEM in terms of underrepresented groups and women. But I was just living it. I mean, I lived it when I was a graduate student. I wanted for it to be better. And if you look at the demographics of the indoor chemistry program, we have women. We don't have as many underrepresented groups. But again, at the faculty level, we have, in terms of at the graduate student and postdoc level, we have some diversity. But the other thing is we have an inclusive climate. And all fields can be really competitive. All right, what's that expression? If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go farther, go together. So my philosophy in the program was, this isn't competitive. This is a collaborative program. So the senior faculty help the junior faculty. So I find that so this is how I've run one small program at a small foundation in New York City, but I think it's going to have a great impact.
So you would be a very good person to ask this question, because it is a delicate question, but it's one that I think about a lot. You have raised two hyper successful daughters, one of which is a mathematician on the most elite level. And I married a woman that's an aerospace engineer whose sister is a high level attorney. And we just had a daughter. And as I hear people talk about separating out and making a distinction between boys and girls or men and women and where they ought to be or the things that face women, on the one hand, I want to make sure that my child has the advantages and the space to be able to work and pursue her daemon. That's what I really want for her. But on the other hand, the things that made me the strongest in the world are in my own world is the adversity that I faced. And so sometimes I wonder, when we think about trying to clear out barriers based on something like sex or race or anything like that, it's not that I think we should intentionally place them there, but I have to wonder if that we aren't going to suffer from and this is just off the top of my head, the hygienic hypothesis, right? Where you start cleaning things out so much, or you start focusing on it so deeply that you have other consequences that come that you don't fully understand. So it's one of the things that I'm very careful, because I don't want my child being told that she is somehow lesser and therefore we need to create advantages, because I want that child to suffer enough that they can build up the resilience to be the sort of person that can pursue their daemon. And I don't really know what the question is, other than,
Vance,
how do you think about that? I think
there's enough suffering in the world that if you alleviate some of it in people's educational processes or research processes, that they will not be totally sheltered from suffering. But it's just sort of like, if you're trying to, let's go back. I love gardening. Too bad I don't have a garden here on the 14th floor in New York City. But if you plant some seeds, you don't want to trample them. Okay, the seedlings come up. You don't want to trample them. Okay, once it's a big plant, it's harder to trample. So I think that in terms of sort of mentoring, particularly in the STEM fields, particularly for groups who feel marginalized or have been marked, if you just sort of look at the data, is it sort of like, oh, you're not tough enough to make it? Or is it just like not worth it if it's that hostile? So I think that, so getting back to raising daughters, okay, I got two daughters. I was blessed with them. I never raised a son, so I have no insight there. I married a great husband, so my mother-in-law raised great sons. All right. But I think what one of the things that my husband and I passed on to our children was a work ethic. It's to do your best. You don't start out at the top. Learning is a process, but you to strive for that. And as you know, both of my daughters, as well as many other people, are competitive swimmers. Now they chose it. I didn't choose it. That's a sport where there's a lot of process, there's a lot of practices. You rarely win anything, but you can monitor your personal progress in that, whatever you're swimming.
Did you go a little bit faster?
Did you just go, it's like, wow, you took 2/100ths off your time. So that's a work ethic and so on. And so they could swim a personal best that, great. It wasn't going to win them a trophy at the meet or at the school or whatever, but it was sort of the work ethic, and that they could find some joy and also just experience hard work. So I don't know. Did I answer the question?
Well, and we
have to get back to the pandemic at some point, but I am having a good time talking about all of these things.
So when you brought up the gardening metaphor, the thought that came to my mind is jalapeno breeding. So when they started,
I don't know anything about this.
So when they started to take jalapenos to the commercial grade, where you could produce enough jalapenos that you could have them in grocery stores all the time, they put them in these perfect environments, right? So they had all the water they needed, all the sunshine they needed, and they found out that every single year jalapenos became less and less hot. And so the very thing that they wanted was hot jalapenos. Right. But because they gave them everything that they needed, they weren't producing capsaicin, which is the oil that is what makes them spicy. So what they figured out was, actually what we need to do is put them in this great environment where they can grow, but then create stress. Pull on the branches, shake them, make it so the plant itself has to produce this thing because it believes it's in that stressed environment.
Right.
And that's something that I want to know, like, how do you create that stressed environment while still having a good, beautiful garden with lots of fruit?
Well, but again, I go back to, young children, you don't want to trample them. You want to teach them to work hard. You want, teach them to be kind and care about other people and be the best find their role to make the world a better place, all of these things. But when you get to, into a classroom, all right, you've already disclosed one of my daughters is a mathematician. All right, so she grew up in a family with lots of resources, highly educated parents, and so on. Yet she went to a wonderful private school for grades K through 8. But for high school, she had to go to a public school in New York City. It's a competitive test to get in, but the school focused on math and science and could provide for her, even though it's competitive to get in and there are lots of competitive students there, it was really a nurturing environment. It nurtured her interest in math, even though there were, 35 kids in a classroom rather than 18, all sorts of things. But so she had stress there, but people valued sort of the process. Now, that school isn't good for everyone, but it's been great. It was great for her, and I think it's an asset to the country. All right. So, but we learned early on about her interest and proclivity in math that we nurtured, because if she's interested in it, okay, we both took a lot of math. So let's now go to, a gazillion years later, I'm at the Sloan Foundation, and I also direct some of the work that we do in New York City. We call our civic program New York City Initiatives. We don't, as a philanthropic foundation, we don't pay taxes, so we try to do things to help New York City. So we fund a program called BEAM, Bridges for Entering Advanced Mathematics. And this program starts in 6th grade. You're like, you can say, oh, the Sloan Foundation doesn't do K through 12. All right. So I said earlier, we want to encourage women and underrepresented groups to get PhDs in STEM fields. All right. So that means they have graduated from college with a strong enough record to get into a graduate school. That means they graduated from high school with enough math or math skills so that when they went to college, they could major in STEM and whatever. So this particular group focuses on poor kids and works with poor schools and identifies kids who like math. And it's not like an achievement test, because these kids are at very poor schools, but they like to do math problems. And some of the work we funded was brought them in for a summer math day camp. And they had sports, they had fun things, but they're different. You do math problems in this, do math games in that, and so on. And I went and visited it before we funded it, and it was just like, it was so exciting, and like to be there with all these like kids, like 6th graders, like all excited about the numbers and the math and the patterns and what they could see and so on. All right. So I was like, oh, yeah. So, but then it turns out in New York City, and this may be true in other communities, that sometimes you don't have a choice where you go to high school, and sometimes you do. And we already had the example of Vivian went to this famous high school called Stuyvesant High School that produces mathematicians, physicists, Nobel Prize winners, and so on. But, I don't know, only 700 or 800 kids a year go there per grade. So, and New York City has, a gazillion students. So when you're so if you like math and this program, it nurtures and they send you problems, and they have other more advanced things that they can do for a smaller number of students. But when it's time to figure out your high school, if you think you're interested in math, what if you accidentally went to a high school that didn't have calculus? You're toast. All right? Yes, it's sort of just because, so already by like 8th grade, you make the wrong choice, or your school can't help you with that. It just, so then it really sets you back. So then when you get into college. So anyway, so that's an example of trying to nurture children who are interested in it. Not everyone's interested in it. I mean, I don't like that.
Thanks for checking out this podcast short. If you like this interview, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button and hit that bell so you always get notified about this podcast. And if you're really interested in conversations like this, you may want to consider joining the Articulate Ventures Network. To find out more, go to network.articulate.ventures.